Greetings, everyone. It's Jonathan Alexander with the Los Angeles Review of Books, and welcome to Writing Sex. I am here today with Saeed Jones, who is the author of two poetry collections, When the Only Light is Fire from sibling Rivalry Press and Prelude to Bruise from Coffeehouse Press. He's also most recently the author of the memoir How We Fight for Our Lives, which came out from Simon & Schuster last year. It's an amazing book. It's about the challenges and inspirations of growing up Black and gay, partly in the South, but also studying writing in New York. It's a story about becoming a writer. Deals a lot with the complexity of first sexual experiences, but it's also an incredibly evocative portrait of a son's relationship to his mother, a relationship that is moving, intimate, and embodied. Saeed, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Not at all. I really love your book. Thank you so much for writing it. It's an important work that I think many people need to read, to experience. What's it been like in the aftermath of having written and published that book for you?
Um, Positive. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm a very anxious person, so almost immediately, from the time I feel like that I signed the contract with Simon and Schuster in 2015, my mind started racing with all the things that could go wrong, or all the ways I could mess up, or really cause harm or hurt. Was something I was very worried about, and writing about my own coming of age experiences. I didn't want to be the catalyst for someone else's memoir, but no, it's been good. People have been warm, and of course have opened up about their own stories and ways that my story either parallels or diverges, but like illuminates their own experience. So it's been lovely generally. I feel more connected to people.
Oh, it's beautiful. So for a Zoomcast series on writing sex, I can't help but ask if one of the things that you worried about was some of the writing about sex that you do in the book, which is an incredibly intimate
Yeah.
portrait of you. There's one whole relationship that you write about, the relationship with a older white man, which is so intricately detailed and nuanced in how you were both approaching each other as sexual people, but also as raced people
Right.
as well. And one of the great things about your memoir is the extent to which it really does open up for readers how we have to think about the intertwining of sexuality and race together in some complex ways. So your reactions to that, any thoughts about how that's important to you, or
Yeah.
aftermath of having written such intimate
Right.
things? Yeah.
Right. I mean, yeah, I things that like I was anxious about, I definitely was like, how do I write about this complicated? It was a long time before I even realized that like relationship was a word for what it was. But how do I write about this in a way that I didn't want to blow up someone's life, but I felt that um, our experiences, our time together, the way we interacted, as you noted, it is important. And particularly, as I come to think of like sexual racism, and it is not just necessarily racism, right? But the way power and violent power dynamics often play out in sexual relationships is not, I feel, is not discussed enough. It is not, taken seriously or framed as being like an appropriate, topic for discussion. Like people always want to talk about like family stuff and coming of it, and then we want to leave that to like let the queer people talk about that when they're own. But I feel we all deal with these dynamics. It's not, about being gay even, it's about being a human being, and the dynamics that we live with outside of the bedroom, outside of the hookup, outside of the grinder or scruff chat, do not stay outside the barriers of those spaces. We bring the world into the room with us, and as a young person, you know, at this point, I was a college student. I did not understand this at all. And I thought I thought being, you know, more evolved because I was like studying literature, I was studying women's studies and gender studies. I think I had a confidence, you know, that's really like the arrogance of youth. And so part of what I wanted to explore using the sex scenes with the botanist, as I refer to him in the book, was to show how quickly that's upended, you know, which unfortunately I think is a fairly typical coming of age experience in the United States. We go in hoping to learn about our bodies, about our desires, and those are important lessons, right? But often, either consensually or non-consensually, all these other lessons kind of crash in on those initial sexual experiences. So that's what I wanted. That's a lot, right? But that's what that was the goal, that was the mission, and that is why the botanist ended up being in the book as much as he was. Though when I set out to write, I thought he was just going to be like literally just a hookup, just like a one kind of chapter moment, and it changed.
It becomes important to you that the scenes become important to you because you also talk about writing through them, about initially trying to write and then not quite getting it right, and then coming back to write about it again and again later, almost as though there are intricacies of that story that needed to be told that you were still working out. So as much as that's a story about sexuality and power and consent and race, it's also a story about you coming to learn how to write about
Mm-hmm.
sexuality and power and consent and race. It's really extraordinarily done.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, you know, something I learned from the book is obviously, you know, identity and identity formation is an important theme throughout the book. And I think it's fair to say that memory is, I think, an identity. How we remember ourselves is a part of who we are, the story we tell about ourselves. And then, yeah, literal storytelling, whether that's the anecdote, you know, the cocktail party, or the, you know, you go back to your friends in the group text and you're like, oh, this guy, da, da, da. However we tell the stories, you know, of what has happened to us, that also begins to culminate in an identity. And so, yeah, it was just interesting seeing that, you know, literally, I think the way we talk about sex, the way we talk about what we want and what we got, you know, is an important component of who we are as people.
Do you think you'll return to those scenes later in life and see how you write about them?
Oh gosh. You know, maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. You know, I started in poetry. I still write poems, and then, you know, moved into writing nonfiction and memoir. And I tend to flow back and forth. I think the different forms and mediums give me an opportunity to focus on different components. So, you know, I feel like, particularly in my poems, I think I'm able to kind of focus on like the interior, the feeling, the dynamic. Whereas in the memoir, you know, I have to focus on setting the scene and developing the characters at any given moment. So yeah, maybe I'll go back. I hope not. It was hard.
I love it. So speaking of memory, do you remember the first sex scene you ever wrote?
Not really. I will say that some of the earliest poems I wrote that were, you know, poems I would say of desire, of longing. I started writing them in high school, which I think I hinted in the book. And I would use Greek mythology. So they would be like, and it would be women, because I wasn't comfortable writing about men, but I remember I would write about, you know, Penelope longing for Odysseus, missing him, wishing he was in the bed, and instead there's like the tree, you know, that she's like holding on to. And so I would just do that a lot. So those are the earliest, I wouldn't say necessarily sex scenes, but just like there was like a craving for the body, for touch. that in retrospect, I'm like, oh, it's clear as day, you know, what was going on. Yeah.
Yes, the ancient Greeks, they had their uses.
They have their uses. They still do. And like, honestly, like, are you a gay man or like a gay man who writes, who hasn't like interacted with like, you know, Greek mythology at some point, you know?
Very true. What's the most difficult thing writing about sex?
I did the copy editor for Simon and Schuster did help me with certain simple details in terms of like there's like a bathroom blowjob scene at one point, and he was like, okay, so you just mentioned his belt was at his ankles, but now you're saying his belt, you know, and his waist were like above his knees. Which is it, girl? You know, like, and he happened to be a gay man, and I was like, oh, that was helpful. Yeah, I think the mechanics kind of tricky. I think also keeping it interesting. You know, I don't think sex is any more interesting than any other kind of scene. You know what I mean? It's just another power play, so to speak. So I think figuring out how to take what's just in my mind just another human interaction and make it mean something other than, you know, the lurid or the you know, that like how is this going to mean something more than my banal interest in that moment is always the challenge, I think.
No, it makes sense. Do you mind saying a little bit about what you're working on now? Anything we can look forward to?
I'm mostly writing poems, and part of it is like the paperback for How We Fight for Our Lives was just released last week. So, you know, I think in the midst of honoring readers' questions and engagement about the book, it's hard to kind of, you know, propel myself into like the next project. But absolutely writing poems, because while I was working on the memoir, I just any lyric kind of potential very quickly like disappeared into the book. It would just like get swallowed in there, which I like. You know, I feel like there are a lot of kind of poems, frankly, hidden in the memoir. So right now I'm enjoying focusing on them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Can you give us a recommendation of somebody who you think right now is writing superbly or importantly about sex, sexuality?
Oh gosh, I think many people are. Carmen Maria Machado. I think, you know, her memoir, which came out last fall as well, in the Dream House, is incredible, and the short story collection, Her Body and Other Parties. I just think the way she writes about, again, you know, power, the body, and the way, I mean, you know, so often I think this is very specific to queer people because of the way we are othered, and that we often as sexual beings come of age in different kinds of isolation. Those initial relationships and hookups and encounters and misconnections, you know, we are studying ourselves and each other while having a, at least physically, you know, high stakes moment. And I just think that's so interesting, right? That it's like, you know, sex is, it's a thing that happens, but also it is almost like a social experiment that, you know, can have fallout and consequences. And I think Carmen does such a beautiful, incisive job of depicting that, particularly between queer women.
I agree. I taught her book, Her Body and Other Parties, last term, and a course on contemporary queer writing. And I was just so pleased that students loved it because it's challenging work, as
Yes.
is yours as well. You know, you really give us quite a bit to think about, and I personally am grateful for that. So I've been talking with Saeed Jones, who's the author most recently of How We Fight for Our Lives, a brilliant memoir. Saeed, thank you so much for chatting with me.
Thank you so much for talking to me. Thanks.